This week's episode of the Mixtape with Scott. I'm the host, Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor at Baylor University. If you're just now tuning in, I am in Turin, Italy. My last week to be here, and I'm in my little one-bedroom Airbnb. Has a little bit of an echo, so I apologize. And I'm using just my laptop, so the last couple of podcast interviews have probably not been the highest quality. I'm not sure how much of a high quality this podcast is anyway, though. This week's episode is with David Autor, professor of economics, the Ford professor of economics, and the Margaret McVicker faculty fellow at MIT's Department of Economics. I don't even really want to set this up very much. I know that it would be great just to kind of go immediately into it. I will say though, it is a lovely interview, and he is a lovely person. And I hope that you enjoy this interview as much as I did, and I hope you're encouraged. And it is nice. It is nice to be around someone that is chooses to be generous with their what they share. And I really thought this was a really wonderful interview, and it's only an hour. It's not one of these super long ones because he had a hard stop. So thank you again, all of you, for tuning in and listening to the podcast. This is a podcast devoted to the personal stories of living economists and to creating an oral history of the profession of the last 50 years. And as probably some of you know, I'm fascinated with causal inference, obviously, but I'm also very, very interested in the labor economists. That is the group that I am really in awe of them. I'm in awe of all of economics is just wonderful to me. But I really I do have a special love for the labor economists for some reason. I don't really consider myself anything other than just a run-of-the-mill economist. But if I could be any one of them, I would be that one. And so this is Dr. Dave Autor is a very important part of the story of labor economics, and his work is going to be read for a long, long time. So thank you again for tuning in, and hope you enjoy this. Bye-bye, or see you in a minute. Okay, well, it is a pleasure to have with me on the show someone that I've admired for a long time, Dr. David Autor. Dr. Autor, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Scott.
Okay, so can you, for the sake of the listener, tell us your full job title and who pays your salary?
Sure. So I'm the Daniel 1972 and Gail Rubenfeld Professor of Economics in the MIT Department of Economics, and also Margaret McVicker Faculty Fellow, which is a teaching award thing. And I've been here since 1999. It's my first job out of grad school. So I've been here for, I guess, 25 years now. But it continues to be just an awesome place. So it's hard to imagine a better place to be a researcher, a better set of colleagues and students, and just the institution. So yeah.
I bet. It's such a legendary department. So let me start with an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you've taken before? Maybe it wasn't your favorite vacation, but it's one that you've sort of think about every now and then for whatever reason.
Oh, that's a good question. I could tell you about the one I took 2 weeks ago, or I could tell you about the one I took 30 years ago. Let's go. Well, probably the one let's go with one 30 years ago. So in 1992, I was doing volunteer work in South Africa, working with the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which was a non-racial trade union. It was the most effective non-banned political organization in South Africa prior to the turnover to the ANC government. And so I volunteered there for about 5 months. And then I had a month on my own to just travel through sub-Saharan Africa. And so the coolest place, so I actually traveled through Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Zambia. But the most amazing thing I did was I went on quote safari in the Okavango Delta. So the Okavango Delta is a grassland that every summer or spring actually floods as this from the snowmelt on the mountains of Mount Mozambique. And it floods to a depth of about 4 to 6 feet. And then a normal safari, you're basically in an armored vehicle as you go through a game park. In the Okavango Delta, you travel in a makoro, which is a dugout wooden canoe, with a poler, someone who, and because it's not sufficiently shallow that you can pull your way through, and you don't have to have a firearm, and you can camp out in the little islands in the Delta, and it's filled with hippos and elephants and rhinos and not rhinos, excuse me, hippopotami, not rhinos. There probably are a couple of those, but there's tons of hippopotami. And but amazingly, you can sleep out in a tent and you're basically safe as long as you don't come out of your tent at night. So that was one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen. And actually, it's very well preserved. Botswana is a well-governed country, and has by choice makes tourism actually quite expensive, and limited, and low impact, but just spectacular. So I intend to go back there before it's too late for me.
Wow.
But that was just unbelievable. I was traveling on my own, so I was hanging out with different people I met along the way. Lots of Australians, as you would imagine, they're everywhere. Yeah.
Wow. How old were you?
Well, not as young as you might guess. So that was in 1999 too. So I was, I'm gonna say, is that possible? I guess I was 28.
Wow. How long were you there?
I was spent a week in the Delta.
Oh, wow, that sounds wonderful. Wait, why do they not want what's dangerous at night?
Oh, well, there's a lot of basically there are lions that are prowling at night. So if you were to sleep outside, you would be devoured.
You'd be mauled by a lion?
Yeah. If you, or hyenas, quite possibly. I mean, your game.
Yeah.
But the main danger if you stay in your tent at night is that actually believe it or not, there are hippos and elephants that kind of tiptoe around on the islands. Every once in a while, they step on a tent. But
Very, this is a hard vacation.
it was so cool. It was so amazingly cool. Yeah. So anyway, but it's amazing. I always tell people who are, I know a variety of, number of people who've gone like, oh, I'm going to go to Krueger National Park. I'm going to go to, the Serengeti and so on. I always say this is an extraordinary opportunity because it's completely different because you're just out in the open. In fact, the water in the Delta, you can drink it. It's just filtered by the grasslands, and so it's drinkable. You can also swim there, but that's a little riskier because there are a lot of crocodiles and hippos. So like our guide at one point said, "Oh, you can swim now." We were like, "Nah," and then sure enough, like a few minutes later, a big crocodile went by. So anyway, they're pretty dangerous.
Wow. Wow, that's cool. So where did you grow up?
Nowhere exotic. I grew up in Newton, which is a suburb of Boston, where I live now. So like literally, I live a mile from my mom, and my brother lives right nearby. So I have lived in different places. I lived for several years in Oakland, California. I lived in New York. When I was a sabbatical, I lived in Chicago and Princeton and Berkeley. But Boston keeps pulling me back in. Yeah.
Huh. Wait, so you weren't an only child? You said you had a brother?
I'm one of three.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So what did your parents do for a living?
Both of my parents, well, my father is no longer with us, but both my parents were clinical psychologists. They both, my mom did clinical psychology with patients her whole career. My father worked in mental health administration and ran mental health facilities for the state of Massachusetts.
Wow, wow. Oh, that's interesting. So what kind of games did you like to play as a kid in Newton?
Uh Games. I was a super, super geeky, super shy, awkward, unhappy kid. I would not wish myself on any parent.
Hmm.
And so what did I like to do? I like to play with like real things and fix them. I loved electronics.
Hmm.
and machines. So like my favorite toys were Fisher Technic, which is like a German Lego set that has, gears and motors and all those things.
Hmm.
And so that was a lot. And then I read. I was incredibly unathletic, the least suntan person you've ever met, and painfully shy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really yeah, horrible kid.
What kind of books did you like reading?
I liked reading nonfiction primarily. I
Oh.
I just I read lots and lots of kind of popular science type books,
Hmm.
how-to books, and I also eventually later when I became a teenager, by accident I got into sailing,
Hmm.
and only because a friend of mine took me sailing and dumped me in the Charles River. And for some reason, to me, I was like, wow, that's great. I need to learn how to do this. I'm not sure if I meant learn how to fall in the Charles River or learn how to sail. But so then I started reading a lot. I spent a lot of time reading about sailing and learning how to sail and reading sailing books as well. So yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I did some bicycling, but I was really a nerd.
Huh. So you were
And not in the good sense of the word.
not in the good sense of the word.
Yeah.
So you were t taking things apart, putting them back together again, but like electrical.
Yeah, I would solder stuff. I built a computer from a kit. I built a bunch
Huh.
of stuff from kits. Actually, I like the Heath kit, which no longer exists. Was a company that would sell you, you know, boxes of parts to make a television or a computer or
Oh,
a clock or an ohmmeter. And I had these, Radio Shack, which also doesn't exist anymore,
yeah.
right? Sold these, 150 in one project kits where basically all these little circuits, like, transistors and capacitors and resistors, and they all had little spring clips and you could use jumper wires to connect them.
Mm.
So you could make stuff with that. And then later when I got to be a little older, I eventually started working on cars and motorcycles.
Oh.
Um, because I bought a motor after I dropped out of college. Uh, Briefly, I dropped out for 2.5 years, but I bought a motorcycle,
Mm.
and then I realized I didn't have the money to maintain it.
Uh-huh.
So I started buying tools instead and learned how to fix it,
Yeah.
and that was fun.
Did you ever get into computer hacking when you were younger?
I got into computing. I was not a hacker in the sense of breaking into anything,
Yeah.
uh, but I was when I was in elementary school. Our
Yeah.
school took a field trip to Boston College,
Yeah.
and we got to use their computer terminals. These were PDP DEC PDP terminals, and they were the line writers, right? Not even with a screen. They were just everything printed out on a continuous sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen that. And
Yeah.
and
So
I had read about this thing called ELIZA, right? This famous computer program of, you would there was like it would play psychologist. So, you would say, it would say, hello, how are you? And what is your name? You say, my name is David. And it says, what's on your mind? Like, well, I don't know. I'm having a bad day. And then it would say, tell me about your mother.
oh,
So when we went to BC, I just said, well, how could I do that? And I learned a little bit of basic and then
yeah.
started writing a little fake Eliza during that
Mhm.
day at elementary school. So I was very inspired by that. So then when I was in high school, I didn't want to take foreign language. I don't know why. So instead I took shop and tech voc, technical vocational. And then in the tech voc class, they had bought a Radio Shack TRS 80,
Yeah, I
which
remember
was,
those.
yeah, and so no one used it. So I started
Mm.
teaching myself to program on the TRS 80,
Mm.
and so I did that rather than kind of pay attention in class. And I also got a Heath kit computer kit there. They bought it, and I soldered it together.
What
Uh,
did it, what, how come when you were doing that kind of stuff, that kind of creative stuff, how did that make you feel? What was it about? Because you sort of described being a little unhappy, but seems like you were getting really excited thinking
oh
about
yeah.
all that kind of stuff. What was it? How did that make you feel?
Uh, Without going into too much psychology, I mean, I felt like that was very creative, and I felt like I was in control. Like that was a world I could master, right? I just loved, I had these like, I mean, such a geek, but I had all these like model railroad things, right?
Mm.
And I would spend weeks and weeks assembling a railroad in my attic, right? So putting together the tracks and the controllers and the different toys and the decorations. And then once that was done, I would never use it. I was not interested in using it. I was just interested in building it.
Mm,
So I would completely immerse myself in that stuff.
mm.
And that was great for me because it was a largely solo activity.
Right, right.
And it definitely took my mind off. It's not that I had no friends. I usually had one friend at a time.
Yeah.
Some of those friends were nice to me. Not all of them. I'm still friends with one of them actually now, who's the chief scientist of Vertex Pharmaceutical. But we had a falling out that lasted about 18 years.
I've
Uh,
been there.
but we're friends again now.
Good, good. What'd your parents, if when you were sort of, you know, doing so well at that kind of creativity, what do you think your parents' interpretation of the kind of what kind of kid you were?
I think my parents thought I was a kid with a lot of potential and a lot of problems.
Mm.
Uh, and I mean, really a lot of problems. I don't know how much your listeners are interested in this, but I dropped out of middle school.
Oh,
So I I refused to go to middle school for an entire year between the
oh, wow.
seventh and eighth grade. And I had truancy officers coming to the house. I had a physical altercation with the vice principal, who tried to get me to come into the school rather forcibly, and I didn't want to. But I mean, it sounds like I'm sure I'm romanticizing the way I describe it. I was miserable, completely
Yeah.
miserable, depressed kid, uh, who was not able to socially function, didn't have any self confidence, and
Mm.
was pretty meek. So I certainly had an active set of interests, but they were was not easy for me
Yeah.
to.
What
But anyway,
was the
yeah.
school? Was it the social part of school that was just driving you nuts, making you
yeah, I
unhappy?
was, yeah, I was not, I was, very, yeah, I was awkward and then when I went to high school, it got much worse,
Yeah.
because, Newton, some people actually know this. Newton has two well-known high schools, Newton North and Newton South. And Newton North has much more of Newton's an affluent place, but there's definitely more and less affluent parts. And Newton North had the less affluent, more blue collar part. And unfortunately, that's where the tech vote was as well. But I was a natural target for bullies.
Mm.
So anyway, that was tough. But yeah,
But those were long years then and long
they,
days.
yeah, yeah, it was. But look, I had a brother and sister. They were not nearly as maladjusted as I was. So I don't blame anyone else for it. But
Well,
yeah,
so
yeah,
towards the end of high school, when you're sort of looking forward, now thinking I'm going to be leaving high school finally, what were you wanting to do with your life? What did you want to be when you grew up?
you know. So I had initially thought, like when I was younger, I was going to be like a computer person, right?
Mhm.
Right? To me, that was, and there weren't many computer people back then, right? Because I
Yeah.
graduated high school in 1982, but by the time I was partway through high school, I thought I was going to do psychology because
Yeah.
I was an unhappy kid. I figured I could help other unhappy people. And so I actually kind of stopped taking math classes in my kind of junior year of high school. And then I got into Columbia. Your listeners should understand it wasn't nearly as competitive back then.
Mm.
And started taking psychology classes. And but then
Immediately.
yeah,
Immediately, you sort into psychology pretty quickly.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I sorted that successfully because I dropped out after 3 semesters.
Uh-huh.
And not because I was failing, but just because I was not functioning in the
Yeah.
other meaningful sense of the word. So I left, and so anyway, I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea even like I was going to Columbia because I got in. I had never visited there. My parents wanted me to go visit. I didn't want to go. I thought it was going to be like the set of the movie Fame. That's what I imagined Columbia College would be, right? It would be like people dancing in the streets to funky music. Not something I did, but I thought it'd be fun to watch that. Anyway, it was not
Yeah,
quite like
sure.
that.
Was a little
Uh,
different.
yeah, so it was, if you get the feeling, I was extremely immature,
Yeah.
and not in a not in a constructive way. So, anyway, so after 3 semesters, I was just unhappy. I had a girlfriend at home. Finally, I wanted to hang out with her.
Yeah.
So I dropped out, and I started working as a temp. I did lots of temp work. I did assembly of microelectronics, which sounds more exalted than it was. It was just, putting pins on chips. I did typing. I did light industrial work. I cleaned up a GTE factory with other people. But then I got hired. Then I applied for a job as an administrative assistant at a local hospital, and they had just gotten a computer. And so I started writing code for them.
What year is this?
That would have been 1984.
Huh.
So I ended up
How big was
spending.
that computer? Was it a big one?
No,
Like
no,
a-
it was an
was it?
Apple IIe.
Oh,
So it was a desktop computer. So I wrote software that they could use to basically keep track of patients and payroll.
wait. So you had done that earlier trip where you had basically was programming on a TRS-80. So
Yeah,
you sort of had maintained that you had some kind of aptitude.
I wasn't. I had an aptitude for it. I wasn't doing anything very sophisticated. It seemed
Yeah, but you
sophisticated to
kind
other
of
people.
you felt like you knew it. It felt natural somewhat.
Yeah, I love doing it.
Yeah.
But it was very funny because they didn't. Yeah, it was so happenstance I ended up doing that. But I did that for a couple of years, and then, but I eventually decided it was time to go back to college, and so I applied to Brandeis, Tufts, and Harvard. I wanted to go locally. I didn't get into Harvard, and I chose Tufts, and that was a great choice for me because I came in that time very focused. And the faculty were, if you come in as a very serious, hardworking kid, you get lots and lots of, bandwidth. And so I studied psychology, but I also studied computer science, but I also studied biology and and literature. I loved literature. So I published a paper with a professor in a psychology journal, professor and another student, and it was great. And I was studying psych, but by the time I finished, I realized I didn't really want to go on in psych.
You got some like minor in computer science, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's really just a concentration. It doesn't even have a formal title. But I realized I didn't want to go on. Oh, and while I was in college, a friend of mine had started a computer consulting company, and so I would spend summers writing code for his company doing database development. And so when I finished college, I thought, well, I don't want to go into psychology. I realized I didn't want to stay immersed in thinking about mine and other people's problems. Like that was too depressing for me.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want to go back into the computer.
The kind of psychology that it was like clinical. It was
like clinical, exactly.
It wasn't like behavior.
It wasn't, that's right. It was not experimental psychology. It was not, it was really just, there were experiments, but they were clinical experiments. And so, and that's fine, but but I also didn't want to go into computers because I thought, well, this is super fun. Like I enjoy this, but it's just going to lead. It felt like doing puzzles all day. Like ultimately.
Have you even heard of economics? Like in
No. I had never taken economics. I was sure it was about the study of money.
Yeah.
And I wasn't interested in studying money. I liked money. I liked it fine, but I didn't want to study it. So I really didn't know what I was going to do at all. And so, but they had a new girlfriend I'd made in college, and she and I drove across the country to California, where she lived.
Beautiful drive.
Yes, but we spent 7 weeks on the road in this car that was the size of a roller skate.
Y'all were going slow. Y'all were taking your time.
Oh, we drove more than 7,000 miles. So we went up
7 weeks, you said?
Yeah. I mean, we went up and down and back and forth and right and left. It was completely non-directional. But while we were at a Chautauqua in Minnesota, a Chautauqua was like an old-fashioned fair. And on the radio, I heard this story on NPR about this organization that was just starting called Computers and You, which was basically a place doing computer skills education for poor kids and adults. It was being funded by Silicon Valley. It was at a Black Methodist church. And I thought, oh, I should volunteer there. That's something to get started with. So when we got to San
Mm.
Francisco, I
So you
volunteered.
didn't really know what you wanted to do with your life. You have this
Not at all.
psychology major that you've said, I don't want to do anything with it.
Also with computers, I was like, I don't want to be a psychologist and I don't want to be a computer programmer.
Oh,
I liked things about both those things, but I didn't feel like either of them was on its own kind of uh, what I wanted to pursue exclusively.
are
So
you excited at that time? Are you like looking for, I mean, you're feeling a lot of hope. I mean, going across
I
the
a lot of
country with your
apprehension,
girlfriend.
a lot of loss, a lot of apprehension.
Yeah.
But I should be clear. I loved Tufts. I loved when I went back to college. I was incredibly focused. I
Mm,
learned ferociously. I
mm,
was totally fascinated by what I was doing,
yeah.
and I couldn't get enough. In fact, I could have graduated a semester earlier. I
Mm,
didn't. I stayed for the full complement of 8 semesters just so I could get the whole thing. And but I didn't know what to do with it.
yeah.
So then I showed up at Glide to volunteer for at Computers and You, and then I eventually, after not very long, became the education director, and that felt
Of
like
that organization, of that
yeah,
organ. Yeah.
yeah, and so that felt like the first thing that actually really fit because I
Oh,
was teaching, I was doing counseling with people, and I
yeah.
was running the technical show completely. We had all this hand-me-down equipment, and I integrated it all. And then we would get these Russian volunteers who would, they just escaped the Soviet Union, and they
Oh,
would come in, and we had piles of broken computers and monitors, the kind of thing that no one would fix in the U.S. because it's too, wouldn't they say just get a new one? But these guys would spend a full day, and at the end of the day, they go, "This is the bad transistor." And they would pull it
ah,
out and put another one and it would work. Uh, so it was a fabulous opportunity. It was fabulous. It was incredibly exciting and eye-opening. And I learned that I cared about social problems like I did in psychology, but at a much different level.
oh,
So understanding people, job opportunity and
yeah.
family, and also the technological deficits that partly stood in the way of people's employment. Although it turns out the
Oh,
technological deficit was only one of the things. It was really
yeah.
literacy and numeracy as well, and kind of. But so
That's
that
happening in that job
yeah, exactly.
because of the people that
Yeah,
you're meeting
yeah,
and that
yeah,
you're working
exactly.
with and teaching.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So it really made clear to me that that's where somehow I was interested in the kind of social service. I was interested in teaching. I was interested in the technical side, and this was the
you're
first place where
teaching job skills, right? Is that the right way to think about
yeah,
it? And
uh-huh,
computer-based job skills.
yeah.
Wow.
So this is the first place it really came together for me.
Huh.
And then I did that for 3 years. And then I realized I had reached the end of it. Like,
What
in the
is this,
sense
like
of,
91, 90,
it would have been
89?
91. That's right.
Okay.
And I realized I was done. Like in the sense that I had done it. It was amazing, but I
Yeah.
knew I was ready for the next thing, but I didn't know what the next thing was.
Yeah.
So I decided I was going to apply to graduate school.
Yeah.
But I didn't know graduate school and what. and my
What made you think that? Why are you thinking you want to go back to school? How'd that pop in your head?
I just thought I don't know. I just felt like, well, I need to change careers.
Uh,
So I need to learn something new. So I thought, well, maybe I should go become a doctor. I should go to a post-baccalaureate pre-med program. And
yeah.
my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, Marika, said,
Oh.
she says, you can't be a doctor. You can't even cut raw chicken. And then I said, well, I'm not applying to be a veterinarian. Uh, and but so I ended up applying to public policy programs
Yeah.
for master's
Oh,
degree, thinking, well, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I will look credible to a public policy program because here I've been doing this sort of hands-on
right.
social policy work. And
Yeah.
so I put my applications in the mail and then went to South Africa to volunteer. Uh,
Is that
uh,
story? The South
yeah,
Africa, that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
Kabbalah?
exactly.
Oh, and
Yeah,
your now wife went with you?
we were not married yet, and I went alone.
Oh, you
Uh,
went alone. Okay.
but the so I was there as a volunteer with another organization. I spent a half year there, and while I was in South Africa, while I was traveling, that's when I was accepted to programs, and then I chose the Kennedy School, and which was really fun and really exciting.
I bet.
But so during my first semester, over the break of my first semester, I thought, they have a PhD program. I should stay for a PhD because, I'm really interested in this question of technology and power and jobs. And,
You write a thesis on computers in work, don't you?
yeah.
So so it's like this is an important question. You can tell, or you're just like, it's like you're not going to get to the bottom of it. You've got a lot of interest in it immediately.
Yeah, I know it's an important question for me. Like
For you.
I want to understand it. I think it matters.
Right.
And so because I decided to apply for that program, I had to take the upper level stats and econ class.
Oh, is that your first time? That's when
Yes, exactly. So I
Oh.
took Adam Jaffe's advanced welfare economics class.
You skip over all the other, you skip
Yeah,
over all the other stuff.
it was quite a leap because I didn't know calculus.
Mm-hmm.
But my mind was completely blown away by this.
Oh.
I just thought, oh, wow, this is exactly like this does it, right? This connects the analytical side of computer science, which I love so much, with the, social policy and personal side of psychology, which I love so much, but does it, it uses the tools that I value on questions that I value. It brought them together. So it's just immediately, I was like a person who had found I don't want to say religion, but I kind of mean religion. So I started, so I was admitted to the PhD program, and while there, I did as much economics as I could.
Yeah.
Not because I thought I would have a career in economics. I figured it was too late for that. But I figured I could learn a bunch and maybe I would be able to use it in a public policy degree.
Are you feeling that pull to labor economics, like in that PhD program? I mean, that's what
instantly. No, there was never a question in my mind.
Huh.
As soon as I discovered there was economics, and then I discovered there was labor economics, then that's what I wanted to do.
Okay, just help me understand what happens when you learn of labor economics versus you probably were just taking as much as you could. What goes on when you
I want to understand
how
computers were affecting the labor market.
Oh, that was immediately the computer.
Oh, yeah. I was like, the thing I've been asking about. I was like, this is what I want to study. I immediately found all the papers. Alan Krueger had just written a very well-known paper at that time about this. And Alan Krueger became one of my great heroes in life. And I wanted to grow up to be Alan Krueger. And someone I did get to co-author with and did get to know, and who passed away extremely tragically. And he was a friend of mine. So I was immediately clear, like, what I wanted. I was not clear, and I didn't think I could do it. I thought, well, it's too late. It would have been great if I had actually gotten a PhD in economics, but I won't have that opportunity, but I'll just do what I can.
You were getting the PhD from Kennedy in public policy, and it felt like you were not becoming an economist.
I hung out with many of the econ PhDs. I knew that they knew many things I did not.
Sure.
And I didn't consider myself to be that. I just didn't consider I wanted to be. I wish I could have been, but I didn't feel that I had the IQ and and just the background. So I figured, well, maybe I'll get a job in a public policy program and I'll do research that's sort of affiliated with economics, which would have been great. But I did remediate as fast as I could, including I was sitting in Calc 1B with Harvard undergraduates when I was 30 years old. And actually, one of the great favors that a faculty member did for me, Tom Kane, who was one of my advisors, he gave me this little program that came with this TI calculator called Derive. And I would use that. So I was taking Hito Imbenz's probability and statistics class. And it's using all this math that I do not know.
Right.
And I'm using Derive, which is like 100 years more primitive than Mathematica. It would do very simple integrals and derivatives. And so I would just do them and I would stare at them and say, what did it do? What did it do? And I would try to reverse engineer the math.
Backwards engineer an integral.
So, I limped through it. I mean, I did not coat myself in glory in those classes, right? I covered myself in glory, but I made it. I made it through Hito Imbenz's class. I made it through Gary Chamberlain's class. I made it through Larry Katz and Richard Freeman's labor economics, as well as Steve Machen's labor economics class. And so that
fun taking Freeman and Katz's labor class.
Oh yeah, it was great. And I mean, Larry Katz, I was in awe of him. He was the other person like Alan Krueger.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and yeah, so that's anyway, so that's what I did there. And yeah, it
Yeah,
was
hooking up with those two, with your passion for computers' effect on labor, it must have just felt like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it must have felt like you just hit the lottery to find
I
people
felt,
that are just
oh my
as
God. I,
tracking with you.
I felt so it was crazy because Larry had just come back from the labor department, right? He had been in
Yeah,
the Clinton labor department, head of the chief economist labor department. He came back, he was teaching. I'd already taken labor, but I was going to take it again with Larry Katz.
yeah.
And then he was teaching Alan Kruger's paper. And then he said, and Larry and Alan and I have been working on an extension, and here are some results. And then I thought, I said, oh, well, my master's thesis is also an extension of Kruger's paper.
Mm.
So so after the next class, I went up to, I said, Professor Katz, I've written a master's thesis that's related to this, thought you might be interested. Here's a copy. And then at the end of the next lecture, he calls me, he says, well, Al and I are wondering if you'd like to work with us on
Oh, I
this.
got chills.
And I was like, I was like, yes. And then he said, okay, so here's the diskettes, right? They were like, the little
The
3.5 inch disc
five and a
for
quarter
what we've
just
done.
or the three
And
and a
here's
half.
the printout. And
Yeah,
I said, okay, I didn't say this to him. I said, I'm going to stay up all night and I'm going to replicate the results and I'm going to report back to Larry the following morning that I've replicated their paper,
yeah.
which is what I did.
Awesome.
So then I just worked
What
with
were
them,
you
but
using? What was it? What was there to use back then?
they were using like Stata version 2.
Two or something. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
and I anyway, I mean, I worked as what I consider to be an unpaid RA for quite a while, and then eventually, when we were writing the paper,
Yeah.
I said to Larry, I said, well, how should we write the blah blah blah? And he goes, well, we'll call it Autor, Katz, and Krueger. And I was like, really? Like I did not. This was not in my like possibility set. So anyway, that was,
Right.
as you can see, I've just been extremely lucky at many, many, many points. Falling kind of, backwards into different things that sort of all made sense to me, but in a very seemingly haphazard way.
It's a beautiful story. It's so just wonderful. Um, yeah, Kruger's one of my heroes too.
Yeah. No.
So you did it feel like when you graduate, because this is how it kind of looks to
Yeah.
me, that work on computerization of work was like just unminable. You could not mine. You and your career just found so much to do on it. Did it feel like that? You were like, I have found a research topic that's gonna take me a long way. Did it feel like that?
Well, no, actually, so ironically, since we
Oh,
had written this paper together, which was
yeah.
published while I was a graduate student, I thought, well,
Oh,
I can't write my dissertation, my job paper about that because it'll just
oh,
look like a derivative piece of work. So my job paper was about something entirely different, which was about the temporary help sector. And
oh,
my job paper was about job training in the temporary help sector and why did they give, free general skills training.
oh.
And so that's the paper I wrote as my job paper.
Okay.
And then as soon as I was hired, I then went back uh, to working on
You get
computers.
hired at MIT's economics department.
That's right. So the first paper, as immediately after being hired, I went back to that work, and the most important paper I wrote was and one of my early papers was with Frank Levy and Dick Murnane, who had also coached me and counseled me, and Dick was, one of my thesis advisors and, the co-chair really.
Okay.
Uh, and that was a paper we wrote in 2003, and that was a very seminal paper for us. But the job paper was something different. And I should be clear, I did not in any state of the world expect to be hired by an economics department, and certainly not a department like MIT. So no one was more. I think everyone was completely surprised by that. Even I think Larry was completely surprised by that. I mean,
That's
they were.
amazing. Wonderful.
Yeah. So it
What
was. It
a, I
was.
mean, they must have could tell.
I think I don't know. I don't know. I felt very underplaced. I'm sorry, underplaced. I felt very overplaced, underprepared for that job. Very
Uh,
underprepared, and it
did
was
they have a strong labor group when you got there?
well. I mean, they had Josh Agris, they had
Oh, right.
Daron
Yeah.
Acemoglu, they had
Yeah.
Steve Pishka,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Mike Peory.
Hmm.
Uh, so
Did you take Hito's causal inference class with Don Rubin when you were?
I
You
did.
did. No
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
You took it with Bruce Sacerdote and Degia, Rajiv Degia.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You were in that class?
Mm.
Oh, did that
They
leave
may,
an impression on you?
yes. Well, first of all, you laugh, but there was a typo in the Harvard course catalog that year, and it was listed
Casual inference.
casual inference, and I thought, oh, I'd like to learn casual inference.
Absolutely. Who doesn't want to learn casual inference? I'm at Harvard.
So
I'm working too hard.
exactly. So that's why I signed up.
Everybody, yeah, that's right. That's right. You know how many times I've spelled casual inference more than I think I've probably spelled causal inference. Um, that's amazing. So that must have been, was that a cool class? Was that real
It was
eye-opening?
great. It was a great class. It was amazing.
Oh, yeah,
And yeah, I learned a ton in that
yeah,
class. It was very
yeah.
formative.
Right.
Um,
And then you go to MIT and what happens? I mean, so you obviously just do phenomenal, but like how did you find your way when you got there?
well, I mean,
Especially
let me say,
not feeling like I guess it was a different feeling of not feeling like you belonged than the way it was when you were a kid.
no, it was a more extreme feeling.
Oh, it was like yeah,
I felt
okay.
like the world's biggest imposter. But
Uh,
the no, but I will say I had amazing colleagues. So Daron in particular invested just huge amounts of time with me, helped me do the most basic things. Josh Angris spent a ton of time with me.
mm,
Esther Duflo was my junior colleague. I spent a lot of time talking with her. Amy Finkelstein, we hired just a couple of years later. I spent a lot of time speaking with her. Sandra Mulanathan was there early. So I got a lot of my education at MIT
mm.
and a lot of mentoring.
What are
And
you
so,
learning? What is Daron Acemoglu teaching you that you think is like the intangibles that that
well,
you have gotten?
I mean, one thing is, the most important paper I wrote early on was the paper with Levy and Murnane, and it had a general equilibrium model with empirical implications.
Mm,
And I solved that model, I wrote that model, but Daron certainly pointed me in the right directions.
mm,
And so that was a big part of it. And then also just learning how people think and ask questions.
mm,
And you're just watching the interactions with students and with visitors, and what are the values? What are the what do we prioritize? What is makes for good empirical work? What makes for an interesting question? What makes for a satisfying answer? How do you frame it? And so it was just immersion. I mean, graduate school is like that, is that immersion.
mm,
I had less of that immersion than others, and I got a ton of it at MIT. So
mm,
that was great. I mean, I will say, it was super hard. I was teaching things that I barely understood or did not understand.
mhm.
And so I had to learn them and then teach them.
Yeah.
And that was really tough. I felt quite like an imposter. And it was tough on me. It was tough on my marriage,
Mm,
which survived thanks to my wife. We had two kids while I was in graduate school. It was tough on my, it definitely detracted from my contributions as a parent. My kids uh, don't think I was a bad parent, but that's because they were too young to remember.
mm,
Uh, and I got better over time.
yeah.
And I never expected to succeed. In fact, I felt like taking the job was a bit of a death sentence in the sense that I was sure I wouldn't succeed, but I was pretty sure I'd kill myself trying.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very, I mean, literally, this is true, but when I gave the job talk at MIT, I was so nervous, I couldn't think. And so when people would ask me questions, I would just hear what they were saying. And I remember, I'd like, oh, that's like question 11. And then I would spit out the answer to question 11, trying to look like I was thinking in real time. I was not thinking. Um, but the talk went really well. I could tell it went really well.
Mm,
Uh, and so like a couple days later, Olivier Blanchard, who was the chair at that point, called me,
mm.
and I ducked his calls for 48 hours
Yeah.
because I was like, I had a feeling what was going to happen. I thought there's just no way this cannot work. Like, what are they thinking? Don't they understand? So anyway, it was a very it was extraordinary. So I'm just, yeah, as I said, I've just been incredibly fortunate, and I think I'm taking me a long time to really backfill the skills I need. And I've gotten much better over time at understanding things and asking the right questions. But I would say there's a good decade there when there was quite a deficit.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I wanted to there's another paper that I'd love to, since this one comes a little bit
Yeah,
after graduate school, your paper with Dr. Hansen and Dr. Dorn. Uh, can you tell me a little bit, just for the sake of the listener, what that paper is? But I really want to
sure,
hear its origin story, like
sure,
how it was born.
sure. So I mean, so let me first say a lot of the credit goes to Gordon Hansen. So that's the 2013 paper. I think you're speaking of, the China
Yeah.
syndrome,
Hmm.
and it's about local labor market adjustment to trade. And one of the good fortunes I had when I was a Kennedy School master's student was to take a trade class with Bob Lawrence. And Bob was a real free trade believer. And so I learned some basic Hector-Ohlin trade theory. And then at the time, there was this big debate about inequality. Was it technology? Was it trade? Was it technology? So I sort of learned the vocabulary and the tools to sort of think about those questions and tried to tell them apart.
Yeah.
Uh, but um, but the way that project came about was, David Dorn and I had been working together. David Dorn was a PhD student from St. Gallen University who sort of sought me out, asked to visit me, and we ended up working together. And we wrote a paper about local labor markets and polarization, and it developed a lot of geographic data. And then Gordon had been a friend on and off since I was on the job market. I had met him on a job talk, and I had discussed one of his papers at a conference. And I was out at UC San Diego giving a paper and Gordon was a faculty member there at the time. And he said, you've built all this amazing local data, and what about using it to study trade? And I said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And he says, well, the China trade thing is really a big deal. And I was like, oh, I didn't appreciate how big a deal it was. So really, Gordon deserves credit here. And so he and David and I developed this strategy to.
Now wait, is Gordon, where is he a professor? How do you know him?
So he was at UC at San Diego at the time.
Okay, yeah, I heard that. Right. Yeah.
And now he's at the Harvard Kennedy School.
But how did y'all know each other? Because
we met when I was on the job market. I gave a talk at the University of Michigan and he was a faculty member there at that time.
Oh, I see. Got it.
And then I had subsequently read a bunch of his work, and I had discussed one of his papers at a conference. So he was someone I liked and was very impressed by. Yeah. And he's a trade and labor economist, right? He's an unusual person.
Yeah.
Since he's really had a foot in both worlds for his entire career.
Yeah.
So he suggested, hey, we could work on this. And then so we developed an instrumental variable strategy to sort of apportion trade shocks to the places where they were likely to have an impact. Yeah. And I think what we did there, and I should say, is related to the work by Petya Topalova, who was an MIT student who looked at, sort of tariffs and poverty in India. It was related to work that actually Borjas and Valerie Ramey had done earlier about the sort of trade deficit. And so I don't think it was, I don't think it was in any sense like shockingly original, but it was very powered. It really was, most people think of trade as primarily having general equilibrium implications, which makes it very hard to study if you believe that.
Yeah.
Because, everything clears through prices. So why would there be anything to say at the local level? But we found very convincingly first that, oh, wow, there were big manufacturing declines in import competing locations. And that had to be true. But then the shocking part was what happened next. And the answer is nothing good. That basically people lost jobs and they didn't primarily go back to work, or many of them did not. And so incomes fell, employment population rates fell, people didn't move out. Yeah. And then there were many other adverse, kind of second order social consequences on marriage, on fertility, on death or despair. So we've been studying that now we're in our 14th year of working on that. And we've written a number of papers on it. and we're doing another project for the Handbook of Labor Economics about this that I'm actually quite excited about. This is with Gordon and David Dorn and Brad Setzler of Penn State University and Maggie Jones of the Census Bureau. And it's called Places versus People, the ins and outs of labor market adjustment to trade. And
I really appreciate you sharing your childhood story. It's funny because you sort of described it as like, you were bullied and not fitting in, but it really just seems like you found your home. Like you've got these long-term co-authors, and you've got colleagues that are not bullying you at all.
oh yeah,
And, you've got teachers that are treating you like they're putting your name first on the QJE and stuff. I mean, it must be, what has it felt like when you think about the arc of your life?
it's incredible to me. I'm just incredibly fortunate, and I try very hard to kind of channel that back into the way I teach and the way I advise and the way I try to support other people.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself, I like to say, like I've never been burdened by genius. I do not. I think I have a comparative advantage in effort.
Mm,
And so, but I'm focused. And so
yeah.
when I find a thing I want to do, I work very hard at it.
Yeah.
And then people have been extraordinarily generous in
Mm,
sort of saying, well, here's a hardworking person, let's make room for that person.
yeah.
And then I've been very lucky in sort of finding the right set of, I did a career that led to a question that turned out to be a good question that, happened to fit with the zeitgeist. This thing with
Yeah.
Gordon wouldn't have happened without Gordon. And that was,
Yeah.
wouldn't happen without David Dorn either, but really Gordon was the instigator of that idea. That I got I learned a ton from that. Obviously that work has been important to my career and been impactful. And that was just lucky. So I like,
Favors the prepared, though. It sounds like you were,
I'm a hard worker.
hard
There's
worker.
no question. I have a comparative
And
advantage in
you're
effort.
clearly resilient too. I mean, that's all those stories, take a lot of people down, and
Well,
you're,
they did. I don't want to, I sound like I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, but in fact, I've been to a lot of dark places and it's been hard on me and also on my children and on my wife. So I don't want to
no, I understand.
convey the idea that it's just everything ex post seems like it follows a story. However, you got
Right.
there and then you can work your way backward and tell the whole story about how it but it never felt that way along the way.
Yeah. Right.
So, but I will say one constant theme is people have been extremely generous and supportive
Mhm.
and made time and given me opportunity. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that you can't ask for much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, did that paper with Dr. Hansen and Dr. Dorn, did it ever change your mind?
Oh, totally.
What happened?
Oh, I mean, I was, I told you I studied trade with Bob
Yeah.
Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
He's a real free trade believer. And I assumed that we would find labor markets adjusted. And that would have been a
Yeah.
greh paper, right? There was a big shock,
Right.
labor markets adjusted.
It would
We
have
were
been
stunned. I
different.
think all of us were stunned
Mm.
by what we found.
What
And
happens? Like, you just start to see these tables, these regression coefficients coming in, and you're just like
we were
processing.
floored. We were floored.
Yeah.
I mean, we literally spent months target hardening the paper because we thought this is going to be controversial. These
Mm.
results are not what people are expecting.
Yeah.
They aren't what we were expecting. So we better
Yeah.
make sure we've got this right. And we
Mm.
spent a lot of time, like, kind of replicating and taking different angles of attack to make sure we weren't doing something fundamentally wrong. So yeah, no, that paper really changed my mind. But other
Well,
papers have changed.
coming through a free market thing can really be its own kind of religious
Oh yeah.
transformation. So I mean, you got your buddies to go through it with you, but I mean, that must have been a really interesting experience.
Yeah, I'm much less kind of doctrinaire or I was a very true believer
Yeah,
and
sure.
now I believe much less in
Sure.
that markets work as well as people think they should be, as they're supposed to, that the frictions are as little as people think they are, that adjustment is as painless. And I've come actually to the same conclusions about trade and technology, which is neither is Pareto improving.
Yeah.
And that's a theme of my work, and both on the technical change side and on the labor markets, on the trade side. It's not that these things are bad per se, but they create, extremes of concentrated losses and diffuse benefits, and they're very scarring, and the adjustment is often generational, not at the level of individuals, and that's something that will come out in our handbook chapter. But a lot of papers have changed my mind that I worked on. I worked recently with Arne Dubé of UMass Amherst and Annie McGrew, one of his PhD students. We wrote this paper about the labor market after the pandemic called The Unexpected Compression. And it really convinced me that the sort of market clearing frameworks I was using to understand the nature of wage adjustment were really too simple. And you needed a model with frictions that had different degrees of competition. And again, this was, I credit Arne for helping me to see that. So so there are many papers. I feel like that's a paper that changed our minds, right? That we went into it like, do we need this? And then eventually we're like, oh, I guess we do need this. This makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I had promised you that I would let you go and give you a couple of minutes before. I didn't get to talk to you about artificial intelligence, but
next time.
Next time, yeah.
I would gladly stay on longer, except I have another meeting starting in a couple minutes.
I totally get it. Well, I really appreciate you sitting down and sharing your story and being so candid and generous with your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time and for your interest. And I hope it was useful, not just confessional.
No, it was wonderful.
Or if nothing else, I hope it was amusing to others. And the one thing that you should take away from it really is, that knowing what you're interested in and you're willing to work hard for is really central, and that there's lots and lots of actually opportunity, and there's a lot of generous people, even generous, really busy people. And so, again, I'm nobody's genius. So I think that's just an example, it sort of suggests that there's less standing in your way than you think to being successful, including in academia, which seems so hierarchical and so exalted. In fact, my experience is that, people are open to ideas and energy, and, they're looking for people who could ask interesting questions and come up with interesting answers. And if you're willing to do that and really apply yourself to it, there's a lot of room. There's a lot of enthusiasm. So I feel like it's given me more optimism. Just the experience of that.
It's funny how you grow up here in the scientific method, and you're like, hypothesis, data, test. You don't really hear about the scientific method, the production of science being take an interest in this student and spend a lot of time with them and work with them, because they might become a very important scientist later. It's interesting to hear how many people have contributed really to all your papers just by caring so much about your progress and treatment.
And also by contributing their own great ideas.
Yes, right.
But I think, what really helps people advance in science is actually not pure IQ, but knowing, having a fascination with the question. And just like, turning it over in their minds and trying to, kind of, move that boulder up that mountain. And that's, that's certainly what, kind of motivates me, is I just have things I care about and I want to understand them. And, that's where questions arise from. And that's what kind of gives me, the kind of focus. And so but I think that's important. I tell this to students all the time. Don't just look for holes in the literature to fill. Ask yourself, what is a set of things that you care about? What are the questions that you can't stop thinking about? Like you long after you've gone to bed, you're kept awake by this, even when you're supposed to be doing something else, you're thinking about that. And like, that's where you should try to do your research, because your mind is already working on that. You're intrinsically interested. You're going to make progress on that because it's so first nature to you. So develop that, cultivate that.
Yeah.
Don't lose sight of the thing you care about. Or, I think John Green, who's the author of The Fault in Our Stars, has a more recent book, and he says, pay attention to what you're paying attention to. If you notice what you actually notice, like what actually draws you out, then that's like the important thing to you.
That's important.
Yeah.
Dr. Autor, thank you. I'm nervous about,
Okay. Yeah, no.
thank
Thank you so much
for talking to me.
A pleasure speaking to you, Scott. And please call me David, not Dr. Autor.
David. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Really nice to meet you. Bye.
Nice to meet you.